Former President Donald Trump's hush money trial reconvenes today. He is accused of falsifying business records to disguise payments to adult film actor Stormy Daniels. Defense attorney A. Scott Bolden back with us now with his take on the trial. Scott, it's always good to see you. What did you see so far that stood out to you?
Well, I think Pecker was a really, really important witness. We call it setting the table. He walked you through the seedy side of checkbook journalism, but he's setting the table because the prosecutor has to give a context to why Donald Trump went to all of these lengths in order to hide not only the hush money payment, but then the paperwork to disguise it as a legal fee. This is all very, very important. Today, we're going to hear from Michael Cohen's banker. The banker is going to lay out opening up these false accounts, and then one was funded, one wasn't funded. And the jury is going to have to understand all of these issues before you can get to a conclusion that this was criminal conduct and a vote on whether Donald Trump is guilty or not guilty.
And that's the key in this whole case, Scott. And I think a lot of people will look at what we've seen so far and say, listen, this is compelling testimony that we've seen. It's great water cooler talk, and it's great for people to have the conversation among themselves. But is there an illegality? Has that been proven to this point, or has there been at least a strong argument to that point, or is this just a lot of conversation?
Well, it's not a lot of conversation. Remember, the jury is going to be told a story by the prosecutor that the criminal defense is going to tell a different story. And depending on the credibility of the witnesses, it won't be soup yet, as I used to say, until the case goes to the jury. So there's a lot more work to be done, a lot more facts and documents to be put in. But this is a story. You laid the fact on the catch and kill. Now you've got the bank accounts being opened. Oh, we'll get to Stormy Daniels and we'll get to Michael Cohen. But in the end, the real guts of the case is what happened after they paid her, how they covered it up, and whether they avoided New York state taxes, federal taxes, or the FEC requirements. Because remember, Donald Trump was running for president during all of this time. And when he was president, he signed the checks and looked at the paperwork.
Scott, you've been on court on both sides of this issue multiple times. How do you get this message across to the jury the best? Is it just through repeatedly trying to remind them as to what's at stake here? Is it really going to come down to a strong closing statement? What do you think is the best strategy so that the jury understands essentially what their job is?
Well, the opening statements promised the jury, both prosecution and criminal defense, promised the jury what they were going to see. The closing will tell them, we'll tie it all together and make it all make sense and say why each side is credible, and then it'll be in the jury's hands. They haven't proven the case beyond a reasonable doubt yet, but we won't know that until the jury renders a decision. We'll read and we'll take perceptions from how the jury's taking notes and what have you. But in the end, we've got another 4+ weeks to go until this story unfolds. And so both sides will have a chance to do that. So we'll see. Just
for viewers who might not be following this as closely as others, what is it that the prosecution is looking for as far as proving that illegality? Because as you mentioned, this is someone who was running for president at the time. How does that differ then from perhaps if this was just a private citizen not running for office that wanted his story covered up?
Well, that's the difference right there. He was running for president, and so he had certain requirements. Listen, if he had an illicit affair while he was married and he wanted to pay the woman off, or Stormy Daniels or Karen McDougal off with $130,000 or $150,000, and my lawyer did the process, and I paid the money, and life goes on, if you will. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with catch and kill. But he was running for president, and he went to great lengths to hide that, because remember, the videotape was out in regard to his bad words about touching women inappropriately. He's about 2, 3, 4 weeks out from the general election. And so this story, burying this story, was really important. In fact, there's nothing wrong with burying the story. You got to report it the right way if you're a presidential candidate. You don't bury it the right way. I'm surprised he wasn't charged with money laundering, but it wasn't a lot of money, so they decided not to do that. But you can't bury it. You got to report it. That's why they went to great lengths to hide it, because they didn't want to report it. They didn't want the press asking questions, and they didn't want to disclose it and have to answer more questions because the presidential race was on the line. That's what this case is all about.
Scott, always appreciate your expertise. Thanks for breaking it down for us, and we will talk with you again soon. Like you said, we got a couple more weeks to go. Thanks, Scott. A. Scott Bolden joining us this morning.
Call me anytime. Great seeing you, Steve, as always.
Appreciate it, Scott.